Under the scorching sun of Dusty Hollow, Jake No-Nose Malone smirks, tipping his hat by the saloon's swinging doors. A scream echoes from the sheriff's house, hooves thunder in the distance. What trouble did Jake stir up in this God-forsaken town? Listen to find out how it all went wrong. Unravel the twisty tale of a revenge plot turned into a battle of wits. Hey there, listener. How's it going, and where are you tuning in from today? Jake No-Nose. Malone crouched behind a splintered barrel, his eyes locked on Sheriff Tucker's squat little house across the dusty street. The sun baked Dusty Hollow into silence, not a soul stirring except for a stray dog sniffing at a bone. For months, Jake had nursed a grudge, dreaming of the moment he'd humiliate Tucker by snatching his wife, Clara. His plan was simple: grab her, ride out, and let the sheriff choke on his own pride. His gang, a ragtag bunch of outlaws, waited in the desert, probably already chuckling at the thought of Tucker's red face. Jake's lips curled into a smug grin as he adjusted the bandana covering the scar where his nose used to be. This was his moment, and nothing could go wrong. The town felt like it was holding its breath. Dusty Hollow wasn't much, just a saloon, a general store, and a handful of weathered shacks clinging to the edge of nowhere. Jake had cased the place for weeks, noting Tucker's habits, like how he patrolled at dusk, leaving Clara alone. His fingers brushed the grip of his revolver, warm from the sun. He'd slip in, tie her up, and be gone before the sheriff could hitch his horse. The gang had a hideout in the canyon, a good 10 miles out, where they'd wait for Tucker to come begging. Jake snorted, picturing the sheriff's badge glinting uselessly in the dirt. His confidence wasn't just bravado. Jake had pulled off jobs before: bank heists, stagecoach robberies, even a cattle rustle that left a rancher crying into his whiskey. But this was personal. Tucker had jailed him 2 years back, leaving Jake with a busted face and a nickname that stuck. The memory stung worse than the scar. Stealing Clara would hit Tucker where it hurt most, right in his puffed-up pride. Jake glanced at the house again, its curtains still, no sign of movement. He muttered to himself, rehearsing the plan one last time, as if saying it out loud made it foolproof. The barrel creaked as he shifted his weight, his boots scuffing the dry earth. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, but he ignored it, too focused on the prize. Clara was the key, the perfect bait. Tucker would come running, and Jake would be waiting, ready to gloat. His gang would have a good laugh, and maybe they'd even get a ransom to sweeten the deal. Jake's grin widened, his crooked teeth catching the sunlight. He stood, dusting off his coat, and slipped toward the house like a shadow, certain he held all the cards. Jake No-Nose. Malone kicked open the door of Sheriff Tucker's house, his revolver glinting in the dim light. Clara sat at the kitchen table, peeling potatoes, her hands steady despite the crash of wood against wall. She didn't scream or flinch, just raised one eyebrow like Jake was a late dinner guest. He strode in, boots thudding on the creaky floorboards, and pointed the gun at her chest, his voice low and mocking. "Time to take a little ride, missus. Sheriff, your sweet life's about to get real sour." Clara set her knife down slow, her eyes flicking over him like she was sizing up a bad poker hand. Jake had expected hysterics, maybe some begging, but her calm rattled him more than he'd admit. He grabbed a coil of rope from his belt, keeping the gun trained on her. "Hands behind your back. Don't make this messy." Clara complied, her movement smooth, almost bored, as he tied her wrists tight enough to pinch. Her silence gnawed at him, like a horsefly he couldn't swat. He smirked to cover his unease, tossing out another jab. "Bet Tucker'll cry harder than a widow when he finds you gone." Clara's lips twitched, but she said nothing, just stared with eyes sharp as a cactus spine. Outside, Jake's horse snorted, tethered to a post under the star-scattered sky. He pushed Clara toward the door, his hand firm on her shoulder. She moved without resistance, her skirt swishing like she was strolling to church, not being kidnapped. The street was empty. Dusty Hollow's folks either asleep or drunk at the saloon. Jake hoisted her onto the saddle, climbing up behind her, and spurred the horse into a gallop. The town faded into a blur of dust and shadow, the canyon hideout waiting 10 miles out where his gang was camped. As they rode, Clara's quiet unnerved him more than any scream could. He'd planned for a sobbing wife, not this statue of a woman who acted like she'd seen worse than his ugly mug. "You ain't scared," he muttered, half to himself, as the wind whipped past. Clara tilted her head slightly, her voice dry as the desert. "Scared's for folks who don't know the game, Mr. No-Nos." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected, making Jake's grip tighten on the reins. He laughed it off, but something about her tone stuck like a burr in his mind. The ride to the canyon was long, the horse's hooves kicking up clouds of grit. Jake kept glancing at Clara, expecting her to break, to show some crack in that cool facade. She didn't. By the time they reached the hideout, a cluster of tents around a smoldering fire, his smugness had a dent. His gang, 4 scruffy men with more scars than sense, looked up, grinning like wolves. "Got the sheriff's prize, boss?" one called. Jake nodded, shoving Clara toward a tent, but her steady gaze lingered in his head like a bad whiskey aftertaste. The desert hideout buzzed with the low hum of Jake's gang, sprawled around a flickering fire under a sky thick with stars. Clara sat on a crate, wrists still bound, her posture straight as a saloon bar stool. Jake leaned against a rock, cleaning his revolver, trying to ignore the way her eyes followed him like a hawk tracking a rabbit. His men swapped crude jokes, their laughter bouncing off the canyon walls, but Clara's silence cut through the noise sharper than a knife. Then she spoke, her voice dry as the sand beneath their boots. "So, no nose, or should I say, no brain, what's the plan after you parade me like a prize pig?" The gang froze, their chuckles dying fast. Jake's head snapped up, his scarred face twitching at the insult. He forced a laugh, loud and hollow to keep his edge. "Big talk for a lady tied up in the middle of nowhere. Keep it up and you'll be walking back to Dusty Hollow." Clara tilted her head, a faint smirk curling her lips. "Walkin's fine. Beats playing cards with a man who can't tell a flush from a fool." The gang snickered, one of them choking on his whiskey. Jake's jaw tightened, his ego stinging like a fresh brand. He stepped closer, tossing his cleaning rag aside, and loomed over her. "You think you're clever, huh? Maybe I'll let you talk your way out of this. How about a game of poker to pass the time?" He meant it as a taunt, expecting her to back down, but Clara's eyes lit up like she'd been waiting for the offer. "Only if the stakes are worth it, Jake. Secrets, not coins. I win. You tell me why you're really after Tucker." The gang leaned in, intrigued, their grins wide as they smelled a show. Jake hesitated, then shrugged, figuring he'd humor her before shutting her up. They cleared a space on a rickety table, the lantern casting shadows that danced across the canyon dirt. Jake dealt the cards, his fingers steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. Clara watched him, her bound hands somehow making her look more dangerous, not less. "You're awful sure of yourself for a sheriff's wife," he muttered, tossing down a pair of jacks. Clara's smirk widened as she glanced at her cards. "And you're awful sure I'm just a wife," she said, her voice low, like she knew something he didn't. The gang hooted, egging them on, but Jake's confidence wobbled, her words sinking in like a stone. As the game began, Clara's sharp tongue kept pace with her cards. She tossed out barbs about Jake's reputation, each one landing like a dart. "Heard you botched a bank job in Tucson," she said casually, laying down a queen. The gang's laughter stung worse than the truth. Jake growled, slamming his cards down, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was playing more than just poker. The lantern's glow flickered across the wobbly table in the canyon hideout, casting long shadows as Jake, No-Nose Malone, dealt another hand. Clara sat across from him, her bound hands somehow nimble enough to hold her cards, her eyes glinting with a mischief that made Jake's stomach twist. The gang crowded around, their boots scuffing the dirt, passing a bottle of rot-gut whiskey while trading bets on who'd crack first. Jake tossed down a 3 of spades, his voice gruff to mask his nerves. "You're bluffing, lady." "Ain't no way a sheriff's wife knows cards like this." Clara's lips curled, and she slid a 10 of hearts forward, her voice smooth as a snake. "Maybe I learned a thing or two while Tucker was busy polishing his badge." The stakes weren't money, but secrets, a twist Clara had suggested that now felt like a trap. Jake had bragged about his plan to ruin Tucker, but Clara's last jab about his Tucson bank flop hit too close. She leaned forward, her cards fanned just enough to tease. "Heard you left a sack of gold behind in that bank vault. Tripped over your own ego, didn't you?" The gang roared, one man slapping his knee so hard he spilled his drink. Jake's face burned, his fingers fumbling a card that fluttered to the dirt. He snatched it up, cursing under his breath, but Clara's cool stare never wavered. She played her hand like she'd been born in a saloon, each card landing with a purpose that made Jake sweat. He won a round, crowing about it, but Clara's next move, a full house, wiped the grin off his face. "Your turn, No-Nose," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Tell me why you hate Tucker so bad. Was it the jail time or something deeper?" Jake scoffed, tossing down a losing pair, but her question burrowed into him like a splinter. He muttered about the arrest 2 years back, leaving out how Tucker's taunts in that cell still echoed in his head. The gang's laughter faded as Clara kept winning, her pile of secrets growing with every hand. She dropped another bombshell, casual as dust. "Tucker's got his own skeletons. Ever wonder why he's so quick to hang folks?" Jake's eyes narrowed, his cards forgotten. The gang exchanged glances, sensing the shift. Clara's fingers brushed her cards, and Jake could have sworn he saw one slip up her sleeve, but the lantern's flicker made it hard to tell. His gut screamed she was cheating, not just at poker, but at something bigger. As the final hand ended, Clara leaned back, her smirk sharp enough to cut leather. "You're not bad, Jake, but you're playing the wrong game." The gang hooted, but Jake's laugh was forced, his mind racing. Clara wasn't just a wife, and this poker game wasn't just a game. He was starting to feel like the one tied up. "Jake, No-Nose." Malone slumped back in his chair, the poker game's sting still burning as the gang's laughter echoed in the canyon. Clara sat across the table, her bound hands resting calmly, her smirk like a snake's rattle warning him of trouble. The lantern flickered, casting her face in half shadow, and Jake's gut churned with the realization he'd been outplayed. He stood, pacing the dirt to shake off the unease, and clapped his hands loud enough to startle his men. "Listen up, boys. This ain't no sideshow," he barked, his voice thick with bravado. "We're going to ransom this lady for a fortune, and Tucker'll be begging by sundown tomorrow." His gang, 4 grizzled men with more loyalty to whiskey than to him, leaned forward, their eyes flicking between Jake and Clara. One scratched his beard, muttering about how Tucker might not pay for a wife who talks sharper than a spur. Jake shot him a glare, his scarred face twisting. "You think I can't pull this off? I've robbed banks, outrun posses, and left men crying in the dust." He jabbed a finger at Clara, who watched him like a cat eyeing a clumsy mouse. This one's just a loudmouth in a dress, and I'm the one calling the shots." Clara tilted her head, her voice cutting through his bluster like a cold wind. "A fortune, huh? Hope you're better at counting gold than cards, because you're losing bad tonight." The gang snickered, one choking on his tobacco wad, and Jake's neck flushed red. He spun on her, pointing his revolver to shut her up, but her eyes didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low. "Ever wonder why Tucker's so keen on keeping me close? Might not be love, no-nos. Maybe it's my knack for knowing things he don't want told." Her words hung heavy, like smoke in the still air. Jake laughed, loud and forced, to drown out the doubt creeping into his head. "You're full of hot air, lady. Tucker's just a fool with a badge, and I'm gonna bleed him dry." But his men exchanged glances, their grins fading as Clara's hint about the sheriff's secret sank in. Jake paced again, kicking a pebble into the fire, his mind tripping over her words. Was she bluffing, or did she know something worth more than a ransom? His plan felt solid yesterday, but now it wobbled like a drunk on a tightrope. The fire crackled, spitting sparks as the gang muttered among themselves. Clara hummed a faint tune, her fingers tapping her bound wrists, and Jake caught a glint in her eye that made his stomach knot. He was still the boss, he told himself, but her calm was eating at him, and his gang's sideways looks weren't helping. He needed to keep control, but Clara's game, whatever it was starting to feel bigger than his. Sheriff Tucker's boots slammed against the saloon's wooden porch in Dusty Hollow, his face red as a branding iron fresh from the fire. The news of Clara's kidnapping had hit him like a mule's kick, and now he stood in the dusty street, bellowing orders to a handful of deputies who scrambled like spooked cattle. "Get your horses saddled, boys. We're riding out tonight," he roared, his voice cracking with fury. "That no good Jake Malone's gonna swing from a rope by sunrise." The saloon's patrons peeked through the swinging doors, their whispers buzzing like flies over a spilled drink. Tucker's deputy, a wiry man named Amos with a mustache drooping like a sad cactus, fumbled with his saddlebags nearby. He muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Tucker to catch. "Clara was acting mighty strange last week, boss. Kept sneaking off to the store, talking to folks she shouldn't." Tucker spun on him, his eyes blazing. "You saying my wife's in on this? Keep your fool mouth shut and saddle up." Amos shrank back, but his words lingered in the air, a nagging burr Tucker couldn't shake. Pride kept him from dwelling on it. Clara was his wife, and Jake was the problem, plain and simple. Inside the saloon, the regulars were already placing bets on the outcome. A grizzled prospector slapped a coin on the bar, claiming Tucker would gun Jake down before noon. Another bet on Jake slipping away, leaving the sheriff humiliated. Tucker ignored the chatter, his mind fixed on the canyon where Jake's gang likely holed up. He'd tracked them there before, after a botched stagecoach job, and knew the terrain. Rocky, treacherous, perfect for an ambush. His fingers brushed the badge pinned to his vest, a reminder of the order he was supposed to keep. As the posse mounted up, the desert night closed in, cool and sharp, the stars bright enough to mock Tucker's rage. He spurred his horse forward, leading the men out of town, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies. Amos rode beside him, still muttering. "Clara's cooking ain't worth all this fuss, Sheriff." Burned my biscuits last month, Tucker shot him a look that could have melted iron, but the joke only deepened the unease gnawing at him. His wife's face flashed in his mind, her sharp smile, her way of dodging questions. He pushed it aside, gripping the reins tighter, focused on catching Jake. The posse's hoofbeats thundered through the quiet, kicking up dust that shimmered in the moonlight. Tucker's anger burned hot, but Amos's words kept circling back, like vultures over a carcass. "Clara, strange? Sneaking around?" He shook his head, telling himself it was nonsense. Jake was the enemy, and Tucker would bring him down, or die trying. The saloon's bets faded behind him, but the stakes felt higher than anyone in Dusty Hollow could guess. The canyon hideout reeked of stale whiskey and unwashed men as Clara sat on her crate, her bound hands resting casually in her lap. Jake's gang sprawled around the fire, passing a bottle and arguing over who'd get the biggest cut of the ransom. Clara hummed a saloon tune, her fingers twitching against the ropes, unnoticed by the distracted outlaws. While Jake ranted about his grand plan to fleece Tucker, her hands slipped into the pocket of a nearby bandit's coat, lifting a silver watch with the ease of a seasoned pickpocket. She tucked it into her skirt, her face blank as a desert stone, and kept humming like nothing had happened. Jake was too busy shouting to notice, his voice hoarse as he waved his revolver for emphasis. "Tucker'll pay through the nose, boys, or he'll never see his precious wife again." The gang nodded, but their eyes darted to Clara, who'd been too calm since the poker game. She caught one bandit's glance and winked, her voice low and teasing. "Careful, Pete. You're looking at me like I stole your horse. Or maybe just your watch." Pete patted his pocket, his face paling when he found it empty. The others laughed, but the air tightened, suspicion creeping in like a coyote sniffing blood. Clara leaned back, her skirt hiding a growing stash. Pete's watch, a knife from another's belt, even a few coins swiped during a drunken toast. She worked slow, deliberate, her movement smoother than the whiskey they drank. Jake, oblivious, kept boasting, but his men were starting to squint at him, their loyalty wobbling. Clara saw her chance and leaned toward Pete, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "You think Jake's sharing that ransom? He didn't split the Tucson gold, did he?" Pete's jaw clenched, his hand hovering near his gun, and Clara's lips twitched, her tune never faltering. The fire popped, sending sparks into the night as tension coiled among the gang. Jake finally noticed the shift, his eyes narrowing at Clara. "What's that singing about, woman? Trying to charm snakes?" She shrugged, her voice light but barbed. "Just passing the time, no-nos. Ain't my fault your boys are wondering who's really running this show." The gang's murmurs grew, and Jake's laugh was sharp, forced, his hand tightening on his gun. He didn't see the knife now tucked in Clara's sleeve, or the way Pete glared at him, doubt planted like a seed in dry soil. Clara's game was subtle, her every move calculated to unravel Jake's control. She hummed louder, her eyes scanning the camp, picking her next mark. The gang was a powder keg, and she was striking matches, waiting for the spark to blow it all apart. Jake's plan was crumbling, and he didn't even know it yet. Sheriff Tucker's posse tore through the desert, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that glowed under the pale moonlight. The canyon loomed 10 miles out, its jagged edges like teeth waiting to snap shut on Jake's gang. Tucker rode at the front, his jaw set hard, his badge bouncing against his chest with every gallop. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of sage and sweat, but his mind was hotter than the noon sun, fixed on stringing Jake up for daring to touch Clara. His deputies, 5 men with more grit than sense, kept pace, their lanterns swaying like drunken stars. Amos, the wiry deputy, rode beside Tucker, his mustache flapping as he tried to lighten the mood. "Clara's biscuits were tough as leather, Sheriff. Reckon Jake's suffering more than we are." Tucker's glare could have sparked a brush fire, but Amos just chuckled, adjusting his hat against the wind. The others stayed quiet, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of Jake's camp. They'd found hoof prints earlier, leading straight to the canyon, and Tucker knew that hideout. His posse had chased Jake there after a botched robbery last spring. The memory of that failure only fueled his rage. The trail grew rocky, forcing the men to slow as their horses picked through loose stones. Tucker's hands tightened on the reins, his knuckles white, as he pictured Clara tied up, scared, waiting for him to save her. But Amos's earlier words about her sneaking around town kept clawing at him like a burr under a saddle. He shook it off, telling himself it was just gossip, but the doubt lingered, sour as bad coffee. "Focus, boys," he barked, his voice cutting through the night. "We find that fire. We find Malone." Near the canyon's edge, they spotted the faint glow of a campfire, its smoke curling up like a signal. Tucker raised a hand, halting the posse, and dismounted to creep closer. The tracks were fresh, littered with broken twigs and scuffed dirt, proof Jake's gang was near. Amos whispered, "Bet they're drunk by now, arguing over the ransom." Tucker ignored him, his eyes locked on the light, his revolver already drawn. He didn't notice Amos exchanging a look with another deputy, a quick glance heavy with unspoken questions about Clara's role in all this. The posse tethered their horses and moved on foot, the canyon's walls closing in around them. Tucker's heart pounded, not just from the chase but from the nagging sense that something was off. The saloon's bets back in Dusty Hollow, on whether he'd kill Jake or lose everything, felt like a weight on his shoulders. He pushed forward, determined to end this, unaware that the real game was playing out just beyond the fire's glow. The canyon hideout was a tangle of shadows and flickering firelight as Clara leaned against a crate, her bound hands still, her eyes sharp as a vulture's. Jake, no-nose. Malone paced near the fire, his boots kicking up dirt, his voice loud with bravado as he tried to rally his gang. "Tucker's coming, boys, and when he does, we'll have him crawling," he boasted. But his men's glances darted to Clara, who hadn't flinched since the poker game. She cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the night like a well-aimed dart. "You sure you're ready for Tucker, Jake? Or are you just hoping I'll stay quiet about what I know?" Jake spun, his scarred face twisting as he pointed a finger at her. "You talk too much for a hostage, lady. Keep it up, and I'll gag you myself." Clara's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stood, slow and deliberate, her skirts rustling as she stepped into the firelight. "Might want to listen instead of barking. I ain't Tucker's wife, Jake. Never was. I'm just a gal who's been fleecing Dusty Hollow's big shots for years, playing the sweet wife to keep 'em fooled." The gang went still, their jaws dropping like saloon doors in a storm. Jake's laugh was sharp, disbelieving, but it faltered when Clara didn't blink. "You're lying?" he snapped, but his voice cracked, and Pete, the bandit she'd swiped a watch from, leaned forward, squinting. Clara kept talking, her words steady as a metronome. "I've got a stash hidden in town. Gold, cash, enough to make your ransom look like pocket change. Let me go, and we split it 50-50. Play by my rules, and you walk away rich." The gang murmured, their eyes glinting with greed, but Jake's pride roared louder than their whispers. He stepped closer, his revolver half raised, his voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm dumb enough to trust a trickster like you? I'm running this show." Clara shrugged, unfazed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Suit yourself, no-nose, but your boys look mighty interested. Wonder who they'll side with when Tucker's posse shows up." Pete and the others exchanged looks, their hands twitching near their guns, doubt spreading like wildfire. Jake's grip on his revolver tightened, but his eyes flicked to his men, sensing the shift. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the tense air. Clara sat back down, her smile faint but smug, knowing she'd cracked Jake's plan wide open. His gang was wavering, torn between loyalty and the promise of her gold. Jake's mind raced, his pride battling the temptation of her offer, but Clara's calm certainty made him feel like a mouse in a trap she'd set long ago. The canyon air grew thick with tension as dawn crept closer, painting the horizon a bruised purple. Clara sat by the dying fire, her bound hands still, her eyes glinting with a plan Jake, no-nose Malone, couldn't quite read. His gang lounged uneasily, their whispers sharp with doubt after Clara's bombshell about her true identity. Jake paced, his boots grinding dirt, trying to glue his unraveling plan back together. Clara's voice broke the silence, smooth and taunting. "You're looking shaky, Jake. Why not face Tucker at sunrise? Settle this like men, unless you're scared of a badge." Her words stung, and the gang's eyes locked on him, waiting for a response. Jake stopped pacing, his scarred face twisting into a sneer. "Scared? I'll put a bullet in Tucker's heart before he draws." He didn't trust Clara's game, but her challenge lit a fire under his pride. He turned to his men, barking orders to prep for a showdown at the canyon's mouth. Clara leaned forward, her smile sly, and slipped a bullet from her sleeve, holding it out. "Use this, no-nose. My lucky charm. It'll make sure you win." Jake snatched it, too riled to notice the faint smirk she hid, or that the bullet felt too light. A dud meant to sabotage him. The gang scrambled, checking rifles and tightening belts, but their glances at Clara were wary, her offer of gold still buzzing in their heads. Pete, the watchless bandit, muttered to another, "She's playing him like a fiddle, ain't she?" Jake overheard, his hand twitching toward his gun, but he focused on the duel instead, picturing Tucker's shocked face when he fell. Clara's taunt had worked. She'd pushed him into a corner where backing down meant losing his men's respect. He loaded her lucky bullet, his fingers steady, but his gut churned with a nagging doubt. Hoofbeats echoed faintly in the distance, signaling Tucker's posse closing in. Jake's men took positions behind rocks, their loyalty fraying but holding for now. Clara sat calmly, humming that same saloon tune, her eyes scanning the gang like a card sharp sizing up a table. She'd planted enough seeds of greed and mistrust to make them hesitate when the shooting started. Jake barked at her to shut up, but her hum only grew louder, a quiet rebellion that grated on his nerves. As the first rays of sun hit the canyon, Jake squared his shoulders, his revolver heavy with Clara's bullet. He didn't see her slip a knife from her skirt, ready to cut her ropes when the chaos hit. The gang watched, torn between Jake's orders and Clara's promises, while Tucker's posse loomed closer, unaware of the trap Clara had set for them all. The canyon mouth glowed red as the sun clawed over the horizon, turning the dust into a haze of fire. Jake, no-nose. Malone stood in the open, his revolver loaded with Clara's lucky bullet, his scarred face set hard as he faced the trail where Sheriff Tucker's posse would appear. Clara sat nearby, her ropes loose but unnoticed, her eyes flicking between Jake and the gang, who crouched behind rocks, rifles ready. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of blood, and Jake's heart pounded, his pride drowning out the doubt Clara had sown. "Tucker's mine," he growled to his men, who nodded, though their glances at Clara said they weren't all in. Tucker rode into view, his posse fanned out behind him, their horses snorting in the dawn chill. He spotted Jake and dismounted, his badge glinting as he strode forward, revolver in hand. "You're a dead man, Malone," he shouted, his voice raw with rage. Jake smirked, raising his gun, but Clara's faint hum from behind him felt like a needle in his spine. He pulled the trigger, expecting a clean shot, but the gun clicked uselessly. Her dud bullet. Tucker fired, the bullet grazing Jake's arm, and he stumbled, cursing loud enough to wake the dead. "Damn you, woman!" he roared, spinning toward Clara, who was already gone, her ropes in a pile. The canyon erupted. Jake's gang, half loyal, half tempted by Clara's gold, hesitated just long enough for Tucker's posse to open fire. Bullets pinged off rocks, kicking up dust clouds as men shouted and scrambled. Clara, free now, darted through the chaos, her skirt stuffed with stolen goods, Pete's watch, a knife, coins, her steps light as she headed for a horse tethered nearby. Pete spotted her, yelling, "She's running!" But a deputy's shot sent him diving for cover. Jake, clutching his bleeding arm, swung between fury at Clara and dodging Tucker's next shot, his plan crumbling like dry clay. Tucker, blind with anger, charged forward, ignoring his posse's shouts to take cover. He aimed at Jake again, but a stray bullet from the gang clipped his shoulder, sending him to his knees. The two men, battered and snarling, locked eyes through the dust, each blaming the other for the mess. Clara, now on a horse, galloped toward the canyon's edge, her laughter sharp as she vanished into the haze. The gang and posse clashed, turning the canyon into a storm of lead and curses, neither side noticing her escape. When the dust settled, Jake and Tucker were left bruised and bleeding, their men scattered or groaning in the dirt. Clara was long gone, her stash safe, her game won. The canyon echoed with the aftermath, a bitter lesson neither man saw coming. Dusty Hollow buzzed with gossip as the sun climbed high, baking the town's cracked streets. The saloon was packed, its tables littered with empty bottles as folks swapped tales of the canyon showdown gone wrong. Jake, No-Nose Malone, limped into town, his arm bandaged, his face a storm cloud of curses. He'd lost his gang, his plan, and his pride, left with nothing but a grazed arm and Clara's mocking laughter ringing in his head. "She played me like a damn fiddle," he muttered to no one, kicking a tin can across the street. The saloon crowd watched, their bets on his failure already cashed in, their snickers sharp as spurs. Sheriff Tucker wasn't faring much better. He slumped in his office, his shoulder wrapped tight, his badge dull under the dust. Word had spread about Clara, not his wife, but a con artist who'd fleeced half the town's bigwigs. His deputies, Amos included, kept their distance, their whispers about her strange ways now proven right. Tucker's pride was shattered, his desk littered with papers he couldn't face. "All this time and I didn't see it," he growled, rubbing his temples. The saloon's latest tale painted him as a fool, not a hero, and every laugh from the bar felt like a knife twist. Clara, meanwhile, was a ghost in the wind. Some said she'd ridden south with her stash, others swore she was holed up in a bigger town, already working a new scam. Her haul, gold, watches, coins, was the stuff of legend now, whispered over whiskey glasses. The saloon's barkeep, wiping down the counter, spun the story with a grin. That woman outsmarted 'em all. Jake, Tucker, the whole damn lot. Ain't no one in Dusty Hollow gonna trust a sweet smile again. The crowd roared, raising glasses to the trickster who'd turned their dusty town into a tale worth telling. Jake vowed revenge, but his gang had scattered, some chasing Clara's trail, others done with his schemes. He sat alone at the saloon's edge, nursing a drink, his eyes scanning the horizon like she might stroll back to taunt him. Tucker, too, swore he'd track her, but his heart wasn't in it. His badge felt heavier than ever. The town kept buzzing, the story growing with every retelling. The bandit who thought he'd won, the sheriff who thought he knew his wife, and the woman who played them both like cards in her hand. Dusty Hollow would never be the same. The saloon's bets had shifted to who'd find Clara first, but deep down, they knew she was gone, her laughter echoing in the desert. The town learned its lesson the hard way. Never underestimate a woman with a plan sharper than a Bowie knife.